Welcome friends! In our first step in learning Excel, let's take a look at some real-world numbers. We'll build our first worksheet by examining a year of Amazon's quarterly sales, expenses, and profitability. Let's learn! Let's open Excel by finding and double-clicking on the Excel icon on your computer. Now Excel will show you a list of templates. We're going to ignore these and start from scratch. So if you're using Windows or the Mac, you can click on Blank Workbook, or as I'm about to do on the Mac, I'm going to close this window with the templates, and I'll select File and New. I'm also going to make Excel take up the whole screen by double-clicking on the title bar. And when Excel opens up, you should see a grid of rectangles. This is called a worksheet, and a worksheet is sort of like a single piece of grid paper of almost infinite size. Now by default, Excel creates a single worksheet and inserts this into what's called a workbook. Now when we save, that's what we'll be saving. The default Excel file type is called a workbook. You'll eventually learn how you can add additional worksheets to a single workbook file. That's for a future lesson. Right now, one worksheet is in our workbook. Now I'm going to increase the size of my worksheet so it's a little easier to see. On the Mac, I can just place 2 fingers on the trackpad and spread them out, but you can also go to the lower right-hand corner and use the slider to increase or decrease the zoom on your worksheet. Just click and drag the little white circle. You can also click the minus or plus, or click the percentage to show a window where you can further adjust the size. In Excel, there are usually multiple ways to accomplish the same task. Now, a few other things to point out in a super quick tour. This area along the top is called the ribbon. Now, the ribbon changes if you click on the text along the top, and these text labels are called tabs. So right now I'm in the Home tab. You can see that it's underlined. That shows that it's active. And if your ribbon isn't displaying, just click the same tab a second time, and you'll see this toggles the ribbon between showing and hiding. Now, Windows users, one of the few differences you'll notice versus the Mac is that you have a File tab on the far left. Mac users will use their File pull-down menu for saving. Mac users also note that if I refer to right-clicking, that's just putting 2 fingers down on your trackpad. That'll typically pop up a shortcut menu. Your ribbon might also look different if you shrink the size of your Excel window, and you can further explore these options on your own, but one critical option is the undo. That's this curved left-pointing arrow that you see in the upper top left of the Excel window. Now, you likely know the standard keyboard shortcuts for undo. They also apply to Excel, so in Mac, it's Command-Z to undo the last command, Control-Z on Windows. So if you screwed something up, you can always go back with an undo. And remember, if you ever run into something that doesn't look right, just search online for answers. There is a ton of great tech support for Excel on the Microsoft website. Learning to figure things out on your own is an important skill to acquire. That's what your employer will expect of you. Now, it's a good idea to save a new workbook as soon as it's been created and to continue saving whenever you've made some significant changes to your work. So follow these steps to save your work. On the Mac, head up to the File menu and select Save. Now, if your save dialog isn't showing everything that you see here, you're probably using the simplified save box. Just click on the arrow to the right of the Where selection. That'll expand the full save dialog. Now, the left-hand side of your save dialog likely looks a little bit different from mine, but you should see some familiar save locations, including the Documents folder and the desktop. Also, if you insert a thumb drive, a USB drive, that should show up toward the bottom. I have a USB thumb drive in here. It's named No Name. If I click on that, you can see the pull-down menu under the file name now says No Name to indicate that that's where I would be saving this file. Actually, I don't want to save it there, though. I want to save it to the desktop, so I'm going to scroll up to Desktop and click on that on the left-hand side. And rather than save it right on the desktop, I'm going to create a folder for all of my Excel work. So I'm going to click on the New Folder button in the lower left, and I'll name this new folder Excel Book Exercises and click Create. And now I can see that this folder is on my desktop. See how it says Desktop right up here? But if I double click on the folder, I'm now inside of the Excel Book Exercises, and you see how the pull-down menu now says Excel Book Exercises. That's the folder I'm inside of. If I want to go back to the desktop, I could just click on Desktop on the left-hand side, or I could pull down the menu and select Desktop just below Excel Book Exercises, because Excel Book Exercises is on the desktop. So I'll select Desktop. I'm out of the folder I just created. I can double click on that folder. I'm now in the folder that I just created. And now I want to save that in here. So I'm just going to go to the right of the Save As, and I'm going to give this a file name. I'm going to call it Chapter 1-My First Workbook. Now before we save, let's notice the file format down below. The default is Excel Workbook. Files in this format are saved with a .xlsx extension, although on the Mac you're not going to notice that. It's hidden. Now you could click on this to select different file types, but don't do that yet. That's for a future lesson. So let's click on Save. The file is saved, and you can see that the title bar in the workbook now has the name I just gave this workbook. Chapter 1, My First Workbook. Now, if you quit out of Excel, you can get back into this file by double-clicking on it. So I'm going to quit out of Excel, and on the Mac, I can do that by pressing Command-Q. Or you could go to the File menu and select Quit, or in Windows, go to the File tab and select Exit, and then find the file that you just saved. For me, it's in the Excel Book Exercises folder that I just created on the desktop. and I'm going to open this folder. I see my Chapter 1 file right here. I'm going to double click on that, and Excel launches with this file. But we got nothing in the file, so let's create our first worksheet. Now, each of these little rectangles is referred to as a cell, and if you just open your workbook with a new worksheet, you're likely seeing an outline around the top left cell. Now, notice there are a bunch of letters in the columns along the top, and there are a bunch of numbers along the rows on the left-hand side. Put these two together, and you get a cell's address. So since the selected cell is in column A and row 1, I see the address A1 in the name box in the upper left. Now, if you're curious how big your worksheet can get, you can press Command down arrow on the Mac or Control down arrow on Windows to go to the very last row. And gadzooks, my friends, that's 1,048,576. That's a lot of rows. And we can also do a Command right arrow on the Mac or Control right arrow on Windows. This shows XFD. What's that? Well, if you Command or Control left arrow, Command or Control up arrow, you'll get back to cell A1. And if you scroll manually over to the right, you can see that after Z, the letters start to double up, so it's AA, AB. If you keep scrolling, you can see after AZ, it becomes BA, BB, and so on. So needless to say, you got a lot of space in your Excel worksheet. So now let's head back to address A1. Now I'm going to click on this cell just to the lower right-hand corner of A1. It's adjacent to it, that's cell B2. When I click on it, that becomes the active cell, and you can tell because it now has an outline, and the name box says B2, which is the address of the cell. And now also when you press the arrow keys on the keyboard, you'll notice that each press moves the active cell in the direction of the arrow key that you just pressed. That cell gets an outline, and its address appears in the name box. Now when we type in a cell, we can enter one of three things: text, numbers, and formulas. So let's try out all three of these. First, let's enter some text. So in cell A1, type the word quarter. Now notice what you type appears both inside of cell A1, and it also appears up here in the formula bar. That's this area to the right of the name box, and that's after the icons for cancel, which is the X, enter, which is the check mark, and FX, which is used to insert functions. Little pro tip: if you hover your cursor over an icon in Excel, as well as most programs, you'll expose a tooltip. It's a little call-out rectangle that gives the name of the object underneath the cursor. If you're ever wondering, hey, what does that icon do? Just hover over it and you'll get the tooltip. Now notice once you start to enter data into a cell, the cancel icon turns red, the enter icon turns green. But let's press enter and see what happens. And we see the text quarter is in cell A1, and we move down to cell A2. Nice. Now in the next cell, I'm going to start typing in quarter 1, and notice what happens. As soon as I type in Q, Excel recognizes, hey, you've already typed in quarter. I wonder if you want to type that in again. So Excel automatically puts the word quarter in there. Now if I type in something different than the word quarter in here, that suggestion will go away, or if I press enter or the arrow key, that will actually accept the word quarter in there. Now I don't want to do that. I'm going to type in quarter, and then right after that I'm going to type in 1, but I'm not going to press enter yet. Instead, if I decide I don't like what's going into this cell, I can just press the escape key. That's ESC in the upper left-hand corner of your keyboard. That gets rid of anything that was being entered because I hadn't pressed return, I hadn't accepted what was in that cell. You can tell I'm no longer entering data into the cell because these icons for cancel and enter are grayed out, and it goes back to having the empty cell that was there before I started typing. Now there are other techniques, so let's type some nonsense characters in, but don't press return yet. Instead, to cancel, you can click on this little cancel icon, that's this red X, and the cell reverts to whatever was in there before you started typing. That's just like you press the escape key. Now let's type in what I really want. That's capital Q and the number 1 for the first quarter results. Then I'll press return. That value goes into A2. I move down to A3. Then I'll type Q2 into this cell. Now I'm going to click on cell A4. Notice that clicking another cell is just like pressing enter. It moves me to the cell that I just clicked, but it accepts the value that was in that cell before I clicked away. Now I'm going to type Q3 into cell A4. I'm going to press the down arrow. That also accepts what was in the cell, just like pressing enter. It moves me to the new cell. And in cell A5, I'll type in Q4. You can use whatever technique that you want. Just make sure that you end up in cell A6. And now that I'm down in A6, I'm going to use my arrow keys to move up to cell B1, and let's enter some data for Amazon.com. So this is going to be actual data, quarterly data from the firm's 2019 performance. Now first, let's label this column revenues. Now revenues is the money coming into the firm. So for Amazon, that's pretty much sales. Sales of goods from its website, sales of third-party goods, cloud services, advertising. Now your accounting professors will tell you that revenues are a bit more complicated than just sales, but Amazon actually refers to this number as sales in presentations on its investor relations page. So if it helps you as a new business student to think about revenues or sales, that'll be fine until accounting class comes along. Then in the 4 cells below this, let's enter our revenues, and these numbers are in millions of dollars. So quarter 1 was 59,700. That translates to 59,700,000,000. then we'll say 63,404. Then for quarter 3, it's 69,981. And for quarter 4, it's 87,436. For Amazon's fiscal year, quarter 4 is the quarter from October through December. That's holiday sales, so unsurprisingly, that's their biggest quarter of the year. Now, we don't just care about sales, we care about profits. So how much money did Amazon make? Well, the accounting term for profits is net income, but we'll head up to cell C1 and we'll just put the word profit in there. But do know, if you see net income, we're talking profits. And the quarterly profit figures in millions were 3561 for quarter 1, 2625 for quarter 2, 2134 for quarter 3, and 3268 for quarter 4. That means they made $3,268,000,000 in profits during the fourth quarter of 2019. That's some sweet coin, Jeff Bezos. Now I'll head over to cell A6. I'm going to type in the label total, all caps. Then I'll head over to B6, and this is where we're going to add up these revenue numbers. Now we're going to add them up using a formula in Excel. All formulas start with the equal sign, so I'll press equals. And the very first way we're going to add up these numbers, I'm going to show you a technique which isn't very effective, but it's going to illustrate why the other technique is even better. So after the equal sign, I'm just going to type in the numbers that I want to add up. Make sure you don't type in commas. So I'll say after equal, 59,700 plus 63,404 plus 69,981 plus 87,436. You got the formula in here. Press return, we get 280,521. That means Amazon's total revenue for 2019 were a little north of $250 billion. Now you'll notice we did not use commas to separate numeric values when typing our Excel formula. Now that's very important. Excel will not let us use commas as separators to make it easier to see where the separation is between thousands and hundreds, for example, or millions and thousands. Now that's because commas mean something completely different in functions, and I'll give you an example in just a bit. But let's look at what happens if we did use commas here. So I'll head back to cell B6. I'll press the delete key to get rid of what was in that cell. And I'm going to retype the formula, but with commas separating what look like the thousands and hundreds, but which are really billions and millions in the case of Amazon. So we'll say equals 59,700 plus 63,404 plus 69,981 plus 87,436. Now watch what happens when you press return, and Excel says, hey, there's an error here. We found a typo in your formula and tried to correct it. So Excel recognizes you can't use commas this way in formulas. Commas mean something else. But Excel rewrote the formula for me. It got rid of the commas, and it asks me, do you want to accept this correction? I'm going to click yes because that's what I want. If I move my cursor back up to B6, I can see, yep, there's my formula, and I've got those numeric values in there, and I don't have any commas. Cool. Now take a good look at this formula. I entered the literal numbers that were in values B2 through B5. That's a bad way to create a spreadsheet formula in Excel. And here's why. I'm going to move my cursor up to cell B3. And let's imagine the accounting department gets back to us and says, hey, you know what? We didn't really sell 63,404,000,000 in goods during the second quarter. It was really just 60 billion. So I'm going to type in 60 billion here. I'm going to press return. But look, my total doesn't change down in B6. How come? The calculation isn't referring to the value that's in B3, it's referring to the literal value that I typed into B6. Well, let me show you a better way. Instead of typing in the literal numbers, and you'll hear some people refer to that as hard coding the numbers, we can instead refer to the addresses. So I'm going to type into B6 and say equals, and then I'm going to type B2. And whoa, look at that. As soon as I type in B2, I can see Excel is highlighting cell B2. Now I'm going to type the plus character, then I'm going to type B3, and look at that. Excel is color coding this for me. So I see B3 in my formula is highlighted in the cell as red, and I can also see the cell itself in B3 is also highlighted in red. Let's type another plus and then B4. That's a nice purple. And let's do a plus B5. It gives us a nice green. Now the colors aren't important, but let's press return and see what we get. And ho-ho! The numbers calculated properly. But if you move your cursor back up to B6, you can see the formula is in there, but with addresses instead of the literal hard-coded numeric values. If you click back up here into the formula bar, you enter editing mode. The cancel icon becomes red. The enter checkmark icon becomes green, but we also see the colors show up in the spreadsheet. Nice visual aid. Now you can press return or escape out of this, but now our moment of truth. Let's see what happens if we go up to cell B3. Now our total is currently 280,521,000,000, but let's change cell B3, that's the Q2 value, to 60 billion. Again, these numbers are in millions, so the number we're typing in is 60,000. Press return and the calculation happens automatically. We see now the revenues are 277,117, and the reason why this was calculated properly was because instead of typing in the literal value, we refer to cell B3, and as soon as B3 was changed, the formula that was in B6 automatically recalculated based on the updated value that was in the cell referred to in the formula. That, my friends, is the power of a spreadsheet. Now, I'm going to undo to go back to the original value that was in B3. On the Mac, that's Command-Z. On Windows, that's Control-Z. Now, we've typed the cell address B2 plus B3 plus B4 plus B5. We've typed it out on the keyboard, but I want to show you that there are many different ways to enter a formula. So back in cell B6, I'm going to backspace over that to completely delete the formula, and I'm going to restart the formula by typing in an equal sign, and now I'm going to click my mouse on B2. And notice, once I click on B2, that enters the address for B2 into the formula bar. Then I can type in plus, and then I'm going to click my mouse on B3. B3 goes in there. I'll type in plus, I'll click B4, type plus, and click B5, and then press enter. Now, some people might prefer clicking on the physical cell rather than typing. Sometimes this is more accurate, especially if you've got a very large worksheet where it might be tough to match up the columns and the rows to find the right address. And let me show you one more technique. You can also use the arrow keys on the keyboard to select the cells that you want as well. So in B6, I'm going to press an equal sign. That's going to wipe out the formula that was in there. And then I'm going to press the up arrow. Now what you see is Excel has highlighted the cell just above where I was. That's cell B5. You see B5 is highlighted with these little dashed lines around it. They actually move. Some people refer to those as the marching ants. And you'll also see that the formula has B5 after the equal sign. Now I can press the up arrow 3 more times to get to cell B2, then I'll press the plus sign, and look at that. As soon as I press the plus sign, the marching ants go away, and B2 was included in my formula. Now I can use my cursor to select the next cell that's going to come after the plus sign, but you might think that you're in cell B2, but you're not. You restart again from B6. That's where you're typing your formula in. So if I press the down arrow key, notice I'm not moving from B2 to B3. I'm actually moving from B6 to B7. So what I want to do is I want to press the up arrow 1, 2, 3, 4 times. That puts me into B3. That's what I want. So I'll press plus again, then press the up arrow 1, 2 times, press plus again, and then press the up arrow 1 time, and then press return. Same formula, looking good. This time I didn't touch the mouse, but I also didn't type any of the formula addresses. Instead, I selected them using the arrow keys on my keyboard. Now, when we look at the difference between revenues and profits, we get expenses. So the golden equation for making money is revenue minus expenses equals profits. Revenues, how much money came into the firm. Expenses, how much did it cost you. What's left over is profit. So if we have 2 of these numbers, we can come up with a third. So let's calculate expenses in column D. In D1, I'm going to type expenses, and then in D2, I'm going to create a formula to calculate expenses. And why don't you pause here, see if you can challenge yourself to see if you can enter a proper formula here to calculate expenses. So pause, give it a shot, resume, let's see what you got. So what we're going to do is we're going to say equal, because all of our formulas start with an equal. Then B2, I'm going to click on it, but you could type in B2 or you could use the arrow keys like we just showed. Then I'm going to say minus and then C2. Press return and we get 56,129. Now we want to add the same formula but for the other rows, row 3 through row 5. So we could enter a formula in each cell, but friends, let me introduce you to the magic of autofill. So we're going to get Excel to create all of those formulas for us. We're going to use our cell D2 as our model. And we'll do this with a click and a drag. So first, notice how we're in cell D2. Make sure that you're in there if you're not already. And this is where the formula is that we want to use. Now also notice as you move your cursor around, your cursor will change shape depending on the context. So it looks like a big white Mickey Mouse glove when you can actually click and hold down and move the cell around. If you move between the letters and the columns at the top of the worksheet, you can actually click and drag and resize the columns. We'll learn that in the next lesson. But what we want to do is we want to move the cursor so that it looks like a plus sign with thick black lines, not like this white outlined plus sign, the one with the black lines. And specifically, we want to position this black plus sign cursor in the lower right-hand corner of our cell. We want to grab this little box, the square in the lower right-hand corner of the cell. See that little box? That guy is known as the fill handle. This is where we click and drag to autofill. So move your cursor on top of that little box. When your cursor is shaped like a black plus sign, again, not the white one, hold down the mouse. And while you're holding down the mouse, mouse, drag down. We're going to go from cell D2 all the way down to D5. See how they're highlighted? Let go, and ho-ho, look at that. It looks like there are formulas in these cells. Let's take a look at them. So let's click on cell D2. Our original formula is B2 minus C2, but then press the down arrow. And then we see in D3, we've got B3 minus C3. Down arrow again, B4 minus C4, down arrow again, B5 minus C5. So what autofill does is it takes the address and then shifts the address relative to the direction that you're dragging in. Autofill with a drag down, like we just did, and the address is changed by updating the rows. Now you can also drag to the right, that'll update the letters. You can even drag diagonally, and that'll create a rectangle, and it will shift the addresses left and right. You can try that out on your own later on, but that's your first taste of autofill. Handy! And there are other ways to do this as well. To show you that, I'm going to undo the autofill. So I'm going to Command Z on my Mac. If you're on Windows, Control Z. Now watch this. If I double click on the autofill box in the lower right-hand corner, whoa! I get an autofill. Excel took its best guess in terms of how deeply it should go for filling in the formula. It went a little farther than I intended. It put the calculation all the way down into D6. I didn't want to go that far, but man, that was quick. And if you click over in D2 and then you use the down arrow, you can see all of these formulas are correct. I can just press the delete key when I get to cell D6 to get rid of the formula there. Now I'm going to Control Z to undo. Actually, I need to do undo twice. The first undo gets rid of the delete of cell D6. If I do undo one more time, again, Command Z, Control Z, that gets rid of the autofill. And now I'll show you a way that we can replicate autofill by just using the keyboard. So I'm in cell D2. This is where the formula is that I want to use in my autofill. Now I'm going to do a copy with a Command C on the Mac. It would be a Control C on Windows. Now the marching ants show up around D2. That means that I've copied the value inside of D2. And then I'm going to hold down the Shift key while I press the down arrow. You see how it gives a selection here? I've selected from D2 down to D5, and I'm just going to press the return key, and oh, look at that! My formulas are copied down, but all of those addresses are updated slightly. The addresses are shifted relative to the movement downward. Nice! Lots of techniques there. If you want to use the mouse, if you want to use the double-click technique, if you want to use just the keyboard, you can do it all in Excel. So up until now, we've written a formula, essentially a math equation after typing the equal sign. But Excel has a number of built-in functions that can perform the math for us. So let's learn our first function. It's the most commonly used function in Excel. It's used to total up numbers, and it's called sum, S-U-M. So let's sum up our profits. We'll head to cell C6. Now I'm going to type an equal sign, so you always start with an equal whenever you perform calculations, whether it's with a function or a formula. And I'll start to type in S-U-M, and look at this. Excel offers formula autocomplete. So what it's showing me here is all of the different formulas that exist in Excel that contain the letters that I've typed. Now you could just type in an open parenthesis if you want to, or I'm going to press the down arrow, make sure that I've highlighted sum, and then I'm going to press tab. And when I do that, Excel adds SUM and even an open parenthesis right after the equal sign in my cell. And then inside the parentheses, that's where you put any parameters or input values that are going to be used by the function. So I'll just quickly show you that it's possible to put in any cells that you want to sum up separated by commas. So I'm going to say C2, comma C3, comma C4, comma C5, and you can type the closing parenthesis if you want, but if you don't, Excel will add the closing parenthesis when you press return. And we can see the sum function added up or summed up all of those numbers. Now also notice I created this function with commas in between the addresses. Now that's why we demonstrated earlier that you can't use commas as a separator, say between the thousands and the hundreds place in numbers, and that's because Excel needs the comma as a way to separate the input values for its functions. So okay, this works, but we can do better here too. I can show you how instead of putting a comma in between the individual cells, we can create a cell range just by specifying the very first cell and the very last cell. And what Excel will use is all of the cells in between, including that first and last one, and it will use that entire range in its formula. Watch this. I'm going to press delete to get rid of the sum that I just put in cell C6. I'll type in equals. This time I'm going to type in SUM open parentheses, and I'm going to type in C2. Notice how that's highlighted, but then I'm going to type in colon and then C5, and ho, look at that. I've got a selection rectangle starting in C2, going to C5. Watch what happens when I press return. I get the exact sum, but I didn't have to put in all four of the cells. I just say start with C2, then I say colon, and then C5, which is my ending value for the range. Excel applies the sum function to everything starting at C3 and ending at C5. Now I'll leave it to you to try this experiment on your own later on, but why don't you try to sum up from C2 through D5 and see what gets summed up. But right now I want to show you another way that you can create a selected range using the mouse. So let's head back to cell C6. I'm going to start this out with equals, sum, and after the open parentheses, I'm going to click in cell C2, hold down the mouse, drag down to C5, and look at that. That's another way to be able to select a range. Again, lots of different ways to accomplish this in Excel, whether or not you like to type, use the keyboard, or use the mouse. So congratulations, you've just used your first Excel function, and now you know how to use ranges. Now, summing numbers up is such a common function in Excel, there's actually an icon that will do this for us automatically. So I'm going to head back to cell C6. I'm going to delete what was in there by pressing the delete key. And now take a look at the ribbon. We can see that I've clicked on the home tab here. So this is the home ribbon. And I'm going to move my cursor up on top of this sigma here. If you hover your cursor over it, it'll say sum or AutoSum in the tooltip. And if you just click that once, Excel will make its best guess of the numbers you want to sum up. So it will add equals sum, two parentheses, and inside make a range selection. If you decide the selection of the range isn't what you want, you can just use your mouse or otherwise select a different range in here. But this is perfect, so I'm just going to press return, and look at that. With one click, we've got a function and a range entered in perfectly. Here's a quick challenge. Now you sum up in D6 all of your expenses. Pause, give it a shot. Let's resume, see how you did it. There are a bunch of different ways. I'm going to do it the super easy way. So with my mouse clicked inside of cell D6, I'm just going to go up here to the AutoSum icon, click on that. Thank you, Sigma. Everything is summed up. Press return, and I've summed up my expenses. So friends, I hope you feel like your first foray into Excel was a successful one. We used Excel to take a look at Amazon's quarterly performance. We learned how to save a workbook, we worked with a ribbon, we zoomed and resized our worksheet, worked with cells, learned about addresses, created simple formulas, used addition and subtraction, we worked with the sum function and AutoSum, we worked with ranges, and you learned a variety of selection options including typing, working with the mouse, and working with the keyboard. There's much more big learning ahead. Keep at it.